Episcopal Church in the Diocese of New York, held at St. John's Chapel in the city of New York on Thursday, the 27th of September, 1860, the Reverend Dr. Crichton, temporarily occupying the chair in the place of the Right Reverend Horatio Potter, provisional bishop. At the conclusion of the regular business of the convention, Mr. John Jay, a delegate from St. Matthew's Church, Bedford, said,
Mr. President, I propose to offer for the consideration of this House the following preamble and resolution. Whereas, this convention are advised by numerous and convincing proofs that the traffic in African slaves, which the people of the United States intended forever cease after the year 1808, hath been reestablished in the city of New York, the seat of our episcopate, wherein, within the limits and jurisdiction of this diocese, in violation of the laws of God and the statutes of the Republic, and whereas it further appears that the said traffic hath, during the last year, increased so rapidly that the city of New York hath become, in the language of the London Times, the greatest slave trading mart in the world, and it would appear that the said trade so flourishes, and the laws of the Republic are thus trampled on for the want of an enlightened and conscientious public opinion in this community with reference to the great wickedness of the said trade. And whereas also it belongeth to this council of the church to endeavor so to act that all error, ignorance, pride, and prejudice may be dissipated, and that truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Therefore resolved, first, that this convention respectfully ask the Right Reverend Bishop of the diocese to address a pastoral letter to the people of this diocese in reference to the African slave trade, as now prosecuted from the port of New York within the limits and jurisdiction of this diocese, in violation of the statutes of the Republic, of the teachings of the Church, of the rights of man, and of the laws of God, to the end that such a letter may be read in all the churches, and that the people may be warned in the language of the Christian Council of London in 1102. Let no man presume from henceforth to carry on that wicked traffic by which men have hitherto been sold like brute animals. Second, that the reverend clergy of this diocese be respectfully recommended from time to time to preach in their respective parishes against the wickedness of the slave trade within this diocese. Third, that the laity of this diocese be urgently recommended to exert their influence in all legitimate ways to stay the further prosecution of the traffic from within the limits of the diocese, in calling the attention of this council of the church a second time to the grave question of its duty touching the African slave trade.
Rise to a question of order.
The Reverend Dr. Leonard is recognized.
I wish to raise what is called in parliamentary language the question of consideration whether this House will entertain this motion.
I submit that the motion, having been properly made and seconded,
the Reverend Dr. Linton is recognized.
It is not seconded, I believe.
I second it.
I am in order in presenting to this House the reasons why I think they should adopt this resolution.
This is not in order until the question of consideration is settled by the House.
I know of no such question.
I move to lay that resolution on the table.
That is not in order while I have the floor.
But at that time, when a resolution comes before the House, according to our rules, a motion is in order to lay it on the table, which motion must be decided without debate.
Dr. Crichton said it had been moved to lay the subject on the table and insisted that that must be voted upon first. Mr. Jay replied earnestly that he had the floor.
A person does not gain the parliamentary right to be first heard simply because he chooses to make a motion while I'm speaking.
If Mr. Jay wished to make his remarks upon the general subject of slavery, he should have prefaced his resolution with those remarks. But once he read his resolution, and it was seconded, it became the property of the convention. He can withdraw it now, and I make an appeal to my brother to do so. If not, I shall insist upon the motion to lay on the table.
Mr. J insisted on retaining the floor.
I only ask the question of my friend, will he withdraw it or not?
I will not.
Then I insist.
Question.
The Reverend Mr. Moore raised a question of order.
Mr. J is entitled to the floor. I am not willing to gag any man in this convention. We can consider the matter calmly, then vote it down as we did last year.
Question.
The resolutions were laid on the table by an overwhelming majority, and after transacting some minor business, the convention adjourned until 7 o'clock that evening. At the evening session, the provisional bishop, Dr. Horatio Potter, having resumed the chair, Mr. J obtained the floor and proceeded to address the convention again on the subject of the slave trade. Various attempts were made by several delegates to prevent him from proceeding, but the bishop decided that the speaker had the right, in advance of the presentation of a resolution, to state his views on the subject to which it related, and appealed to the convention to maintain silence. Notwithstanding this decision and appeal, Mr. J was frequently interrupted, and these interruptions continued until a late hour.
Mr. President, I rise to offer a resolution which I regard as of essential importance, not simply to the success, but to the continued existence of some of the foreign missions in which the Church in this diocese feels a profound interest. The convention perhaps anticipate my announcement that I refer to our missions on the western coast of Africa.
For the next hour and a half, Mr. J offered his arguments and proofs supporting his resolution. They are summarized thusly. A, the illegal slave trade continues unabated, with ships operating out of New York. B, the slave trade and slavery itself lead to continued and unjust misery. C, the duty of the Church, contrary to the claims of many, is indeed to meddle in and oppose injustice. D, the Church of England and even the Roman Catholic Papal See have already made urgent condemnations of slavery and have called upon the Episcopal Church to do likewise. E, instead, the Episcopal Church has continued to support and promote slavery and the slave trade by its writings and the elevation of slavery-advocating bishops. F, but the 1853 Convention's vote to admit St. Philip's to convention gives him hope for success this year.
Therefore, I move, sir, the adoption of these resolutions, whereas the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States have, through their Board of Foreign Missions, established various missions on the coast of Africa, and this convention feels a strong interest in the success of the said missions as a means for the conversion of Africa to the principles and practices of Christianity. And whereas it has been made to appear to this convention that a class of persons residing in the Diocese of New York are engaged in sending vessels to the western coast of Africa with the view of kidnapping and reducing to slavery large numbers of the said people. And it is publicly pretended and asserted that the doctrine of Christianity justifies and approves of the enslaving of men, women, and children, and reducing them to the condition of chattels. And there is good reason to believe that the said trade will interfere materially with the said missions, and that a belief on the part of the Africans that those who engage in the African slave trade are Christians may indispose the Africans so believing to embrace Christianity and lead them to reject with scorn and indignation the teachings of our missionaries. Therefore resolved that this convention, in order to prevent all misapprehension in regard to the position of the Church in this diocese on the subject of slave trade, do hereby declare and announce that this convention do utterly reject the doctrine that men may be lawfully kidnapped and held in slavery by any other persons, and do utterly condemn the said practice as a great sin against God and man, and do adopt, in regard thereto, the words of St. Cyprian in writing to the bishops of Numidia. Both religion and humanity make it a duty for us to work for the deliverance of the captive. It is Jesus Christ himself whom we ought to consider in our captive brothers. It is him whom we should deliver from captivity, him who hath delivered us from death.
Dr. James McCune Smith, a delegate from St. Philip's Church, New York, seconded the resolutions. Mr. Floyd Smith, a delegate from the Church of the Ascension, New York, moved that the resolution be laid on the table. Mr. Jay called for a vote by orders.
The resolution was defective, as it pledges us to do nothing.
I will cheerfully assent to any amendment which the reverend and learned gentleman from Trinity might suggest to make the action sought for by the resolutions more direct and effective.
No amendment to the resolution was offered, and the vote to lay the resolutions on the table was voted upon by orders. 55 clergy voted aye. 7 voted no. 149 did not vote. 44 laymen voted aye. 6 voted no. 137 did not vote. So the preamble and the resolution were laid upon the table.